Titanic Talk with Nelson Aspen and Alexandra Boyd. Here we feature stories from the independent documentary Ship of Dreams Titanic Movie Diaries and everything else to do with the iconic ship. From James Cameron's epic groundbreaking movie to the history and legacy of Titanic herself. Join us and our special guests as we continue the 25th anniversary celebrations of Titanic. This is your first-class ticket to everything aboard the Ship of Dreams.
I'm Nelson Aspen, and it's another episode of Titanic Talk with my lovely co-host Alexandra Boyd, known primarily these days as the filmmaker, director, narrator, producer of the new documentary Ship of Dreams Titanic Movie Diaries, capitalizing on her experience of being in James Cameron's Titanic. Way back 25 years ago. I have a wonderful surprise for Alexandra today. Are you ready, my friend?
I hope so. Yes, I'm not a big surprise person, but if it's you, Nelson, it's probably something rather wonderful. But yes.
Well, so much of our conversations here are with artists, authors, historians, all as they pertain to the Titanic. But sometimes serendipity just kicks in. And I was watching, I'm in New York City, of course, and I was watching the local news, and they were doing a story that immediately captivated me as a pop culture buff about an exhibition here in New York called the Museum of Failure. The Museum of Failure. So I was watching it with great amusement about all the different inventions and trends that have gone on over the last century or so, and why they're important because of how they failed. The curator of this exhibition is a clinical psychologist by the name of Dr. Samuel West. And of course, I had to seize the opportunity when in the Museum of Failure, one of the most controversial inclusions in the exhibition is the Titanic. So with all great, with the miracle of the internet, we are going to zip over to Sweden, where we will find Dr. West to talk more about this. Welcome to Titanic Talk, Dr. West.
Thank you very much. This is one of the weirdest podcast inquiries I've gotten. Would you like to come on a pod and talk about Titanic? I'm like, yeah, of course.
Well, but and there's been a bit of controversy with your inclusion of Titanic. But first of all, let's start at the beginning when you were assembling this. Give me the origins of the museum and then ultimately how Titanic figured in.
So the museum started in Sweden in 2017. And it was born, my research has been focused on how organizations can boost their innovative abilities. And one of the obstacles to innovation is the fear of failure. And I thought an exhibit or a museum of failure would be a good way to communicate how important it is to accept failure in the name of progress. So that's the background to it. And it's a touring exhibition, so it stays about 2-3 months in each place.
And what was the decision? Whose idea was it? Titanic should be in there, and then manifesting that.
Well, I mean, it's not that difficult to sort of see the process, like failed innovations, failure, and then the Titanic is bound to show up sooner or later. You can't argue that it's not a failure, right?
Well, one thing I think that came across in our documentary when the actors were just ruminating, not just about the subject matter of James Cameron's Titanic, but the hubris of Titanic, and this was an unsinkable ship. It was almost setting themselves up. It was jinxing. It was taunting the fates and the gods to not sink it. And at the same time, in total parallel, James Cameron was spending more money on a film than anybody had ever spent before. He had to pull it off, and everybody, certainly until it opened, the day, that opening weekend, everybody was kind of wanting it to be a flop, because how dare you spend so much money? And then, of course, it became this stratospheric success. So you've got two parallels: a film that could have failed about a ship that failed. And I think you get pushback from the Titaniacs and the Titanic historians, maybe because nobody this story, and the ship is so beloved, and the tragedy around it, nobody wants to admit. I think it's the admission to failure. It's just as powerful as having failed and then doing it again successfully and learning from your mistakes.
Well, and all the inquiries where everybody was trying to blame somebody else. Oh, it was the shipbuilder's fault, or it was Mother Nature's fault, or whomever.
Or the rivets.
What's the blowback you've gotten from the Titanic Historical Society, the city of Belfast? I mean, what kind of negative reaction have you gotten, Doctor?
Well, the reaction for including the Titanic I haven't gotten a lot of criticism more than from Belfast. So I think the newspaper, the biggest newspaper, is called Belfast Times. If not, I just made that up. Whatever the newspaper of Belfast is, they called me up and they told me that there's a hate group in Belfast that hates me because I put Titanic in the Museum of Failure, and I also have a DeLorean sports car in the museum, and they were both built in Belfast, and they were like, why are you picking on Belfast as an example of failure in your museum? So I thought that was quite funny because they're both from Belfast.
I read that article, and there's yet a third Irish element in that article. So there's a triumvirate of Irish failure. Do you remember what that is?
No, what's the third one?
The Guinness Light. When they tried to
right.
make a Guinness Light.
That's right. I couldn't get a hold of a Guinness, any sort of can or anything. So it's not.
They buried them all.
Yet.
They put them all in the bottom of the Titanic. They're at the bottom of the North Atlantic.
So is it?
Yeah, no. I forgot about that. I forgot about the Guinness Light. That's going straight into the museum. Thank you.
I did a little bit of research for this, I have to say. But so have you? I think it's probably safe to say you're staying out of Belfast, or have you visited?
I visited Belfast, but that was before Museum of Failure existed, so I don't think I would dare visit Northern Ireland now.
I don't. Maybe the giant Titanic exhibition there will make you change your mind. What are your feelings about the Titanic? Do you happen to be a particularly interested person in the history or the film of Titanic?
No, I'm not particularly interested in the Titanic per se, but I do like a good story, and the Titanic is, it's such a great story, and it's so nuanced and rich, like you just mentioned. I was trying to, because I have to write a text, do my research, and what was the innovation, like what were they trying, how were they pushing technology, or how were they pushing forward, and also what was the cause. And as you guys can appreciate, that's not easy to find out what was the cause of it sinking.
There are so many theories. Like if it had struck the iceberg full on, it would have probably just sort of blunted its nose and kept going. But we all know the famous compartments. It hit just the wrong number of compartments to take on water that quickly.
And the theory of the rivets.
Yeah, that's the one I use. So that's the one I put in the text, the rivet one, with that the way I'm by no means an expert in boat building or doing historical research, but what I could gather is that the rivet sort of theory was what I could, at least according to my judgment, I thought that was probably the one that had the most traction. You can correct me on that.
Well, I don't think we can. I think the theories are out there, and everybody's going to stick to the one that suits their particular point of view, like so many conspiracy theories, or
what are the biggest?
If they had not tried to steer away but had seen the iceberg and gone straight into it, or all these different, if they hadn't been going at top speed, and all of the different reasons why, it's all speculation in the end, isn't it?
Yeah. But I mean, it does. I mean, for the Museum of Failure, which is about taking risks, meaningful risks, and testing out new technology, new ideas, it does fit the narrative of the museum. The sad thing is, of course, that so many people died, but mean, they do the shipbuilders, the designers, they deserve a lot of credit for actually, you know, investing in the safety of the ship. Then things obviously went wrong, and they didn't do it well enough.
But there also weren't enough lifeboats because they were so confident they weren't going to need them, and that's a huge failure on us. And also not quite a failure, but the SOS was the first distress signal. It was the first time they used SOS as a distress signal, but they didn't have enough boats for the number of people on board. And of course, that changed the law because now they have to have.
I was going to say there was an interesting documentary just recently on National Geographic where James Cameron was looking back on his film to say, did I get this right? Did I get that wrong? And one of the things about the lifeboats was, even though, yes, technically there weren't enough lifeboats, the process of lowering the lifeboats, they couldn't have, there were two that got washed off. I mean, they wouldn't have had time in the time that it took to sink anyway. They wouldn't have time. So fate works in mysterious ways. One of the themes in Alexandra's documentary is a theme to actors about about being working actors and celebrating these smaller roles, which are by no means small in the legacy of James Cameron's film, that are peppered throughout the film, and the lessons that actors learn about stick-to-itiveness and going through the process year after year, project after project.
Failure, not getting that job, not getting this job. Just keep going, keep going. That's how you. And failure is how you learn. You know, to get better next time. You do it differently next time.
Exactly.
And so I'm curious, because you're now an expert in failure, but of all the different hats you wear, having looked at your website and all the different exhibitions you have curated and continue to curate, what was it about failure versus progress? What was the nucleus of that when you were, I guess, in school or right after school?
I think I never actually, I didn't give it much thought until I started researching creativity and innovation and how important it is to be able to explore and to experiment. And those activities of exploration and experimentation, those are very prone to failure. And if you're not willing to fail in those activities, then you're not going to move anything. You're not going to push any boundaries. And this is equally true on a sort of a corporate innovation level as it is for actors, or as it is for us in our personal lives. Unless you're willing to, continue that exploration and to test new things, you're not actually going to do anything new. You're never going to.
It's the risk reward element, isn't it? There's algorithms and research about it. It's like, if some people are risk averse with their money, with their innovations, and they will never be an entrepreneur. They will their career. I can say that now, going from being an actor to a filmmaker. And a friend of mine who invested in both my films, she said, Alexandra, you have what I don't have. I have some money I can give you, but I would never risk so much to make a film. And so, you have to have the risk averse people who trust the risk available people to and I saw the reward. Is a feature film at the end of it, and potentially an ongoing feature film directing and writing career, which it is now. But there were many times when I just thought, oh, it's like pushing a boulder up a hill, and if I let go of this boulder, it's just going to roll over and crush me. But you couldn't have said that to Thomas Andrews or any of the people at the White Star Line who ordered the Titanic. They just saw success, the fastest passage from the UK to New York. Let's go.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a good point, because not everybody has that tolerance of uncertainty or that tolerance of risk. So some people have a naturally high tolerance and other people don't, and those are individual differences. In fact, there's some research that shows that if everybody was a risk taker, society would be an absolute catastrophe.
Yes. We'd all be just like dancing in the streets and not going to work.
Oh, yeah, no, we don't need traffic rules. No. Oh, yeah. I mean, we do need those risk averse people. And I think that actually in a society that's so sort of, I mean, there's some fun, as even though I preach the gospel of failure, I still, I mean, I wouldn't want a society that just totally accepts failure in every form all the time. I mean, there's some failure that I think that's good failure where you're pushing, you're testing and you're pushing forward and developing as a person, or you know, whether it's a innovative product or service. And that's a good type of failure. But that failure you mentioned about the Titanic not having lifeboats, that's a predictable, preventable failure. You know what I mean? Like the hull construction and whatever, the rivet, you know, the whole technology with the Titanic, that was actually pushing forward. That's a good type of failure in this sort of categorization. But not having lifeboats, that was predicted. You could have predicted that and you could have prevented it. So that's not a good failure. That's not the kind of failure I would ever want anyone to accept. That should be penalized.
Even Kate Winslet figured that out, or like in the first 20 minutes of the movie, she figured that out herself. You mentioned that you've got kids. So I'm curious in terms of parenting. Some parents, if their kids fail, you know, you're punished. Some other parents say, "Oh, okay, sport, try again." How do you handle failure in your household? I don't know how old your kids are, but like, as a dad, how do you handle failure around the house?
My kids are very familiar with the failure of their father. So that's not even a topic that's interesting anymore. But I really hope that I have taught them, or led by example, or role model the idea that, you know, if you're just playing it safe all the time, then obviously your failure rate's going to be much lower. But if you're actually you know, pushing yourself, and you have these expectations and curiosity driven sort of activities, most of them will fail, and that's okay. And I hope that I've, you know, communicated that.
It's how you learn, isn't it? It's there's this helicopter parenting where, you know, they're just wrapped in cotton wool and not allowed to go out there. I mean, you know, there's all those memes on Facebook, like, do you remember, you know, playing out in the outside of the cul-de-sac until it got dark? I was always the last child in. Every child would get called in, and my mum she was a working mum, you know, she's like, "Oh, you're back." You know, there was, you know, bicycles without stabilizers and no crash helmets, and of course children were injured, I'm sure, but you know, we just sort of got on with it with scraped knees, and just, that's how you learn. How can you learn if you are always successful?
If you never make a mistake,
everything comes easily.
Yeah. And that's one of the, like, I think, okay, this might be off topic, but one of the issues with, there was an alarming reports, I don't know if it was 5 or 10 years ago, of college students, you know, that age group, 18, 20, that were that had never experienced failure or never experienced any kind of hardship, and then they come into, you know, college, and mommy and daddy aren't there to sweep away the obstacles in their lives, and they were, I mean, it was a rude awakening for them, and what happened is many of these kids developed, you know, serious sort of problems, and were unhappy and anxious because of things that they, you know, aren't a big deal otherwise. You should be able to handle, because they never learned to handle these setbacks or you know, failures. So there is something.
And I'm sure you could argue that the White Star Line, the next, I don't know if the Olympic was the next boat they built, or if she was being built in tandem. I'm sure we'll get letters about that to fill me in.
And the Britannic, I mean, you know,
the Olympic stayed afloat until she was sunk by a German U-boat. Oh gosh, am I saying the right things, Nelson?
Well, yeah, I mean, there were a series of ships. One, some are luckier than others. But,
yes.
like films. I mean, like you said, Alexandra, James Cameron didn't know if his film would be a failure or not. Certainly, when they made the movie Westworld or the movie Ishtar, which I did have a part in, they were the most tremendous box office flops of their time. So you never know, and it's about, I guess, how you recover from it. So if we were to go to the Museum of Failure, Dr. West, what is it? I know we might see the DeLorean, we might see Linda Evans' electronic face mask to rejuvenate your skin, failed food products. What do we see? What is the Titanic representation in the museum?
The Titanic is part of a section we call Failure in Motion. It's just a spin on their sort of transportation themed. That's where we have the failed cars, the Segway. We have a plastic bicycle from Sweden that was a failure. That's where we have a motorcycle by Honda that was designed for people who don't like motorcycles, and then they were surprised that it failed. And I mean, that's the context where the Titanic is shown. It's there as a mode of transportation.
The Segway is considered a failure, because I loved it when they first came out.
Yeah, they were super exciting. I remember it too. There was nothing more. The expectations of the Segway were just enormous. I mean, this is 2001, and the big shot sort of investors and Silicon Valley folks, they thought it was going to be bigger than the internet.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I mean, dial up. There's a failure.
but it's interesting. The reason the Segway's in the museum is because it was a commercial failure and it didn't live up to the expectations. So
like Titanic.
Exactly. This is what I see. The relevance to the Titanic is that. So had they just been screwing around, like, hey, we're going to test this. We've built this boat and we don't think it's sinkable. We're going to take it up to the Arctic and just crash it into icebergs and see what happens. Then it would not have been a failure. They would have said, okay, now we understand what the properties are. Then it would have been called an experiment. It would have been a total success to everything they learned from it. What they did wrong is that they built it and they had hubris, they thought everything was going to be, the expectations were unrealistically hyped up.
The ship of dreams.
That's what cost people their lives, it's if they would have tested this earlier on and tested prototypes or tested the technology, they would have known what the weak points were.
This is why I question, this is an ongoing project which you may or may not be aware of, but we've been reading about it for years and I don't know at what stage of progress they're in, but some company is building Titanic 2. They are making a new Ship of Dreams, and all that, ocean liner enthusiasts will be queuing up to buy tickets on this. Is that a psychologically poor decision to be making a Titanic 2, let alone to be calling it Titanic 2?
Yeah, it does seem a bit morbid, doesn't it? You don't name. Yeah, no, I don't think it sounds like a great idea, but I mean, on the other hand, the Titanic is so well known and the story is so well known that it might actually work out. People might be willing to buy the tickets onto the ship.
There is a I think it's halfway through, but there is a life-size Titanic hotel being built in China, and it's been sort of been dogged by financial, upsets,
really,
and roadblocks. But yes, but it is on dry land. You can go and you can have a Titanic hotel experience, and I'm sure it'll feel like it did to me walking through James Cameron's set, which was so detailed and to scale. You couldn't see the edges. But that has been dogged by failure because it's very expensive to try and reproduce what the Edwardians did.
I'm waiting for the Hindenburg Hilton. That's what I want. That's what's next on my list.
I want to go to the Chernobyl sauna.
What we are self-confessed Titaniacs, Dr. West. We are not just involved with James Cameron's Titanic on so many recreational and professional levels, but we are Titaniacs. We are fans of the Titanic genre itself. What do you suppose explains that? Why are so many of us, millions of us, across generations, across cultures, fascinated with the Titanic story? Can you offer up an explanation from your psychological point of view?
Oh, I love this question. I mean, one element is definitely that there's, you know, there's hope and there's tragedy in there, and it is that there's such a rich. I mean, there's so much written about it. There's so many people were affected by the Titanic. It's such a rich story, so everyone can find something in that story that's interests them or relates to them. I think that's one thing, and then another element, and I don't know how strong this element is, but there is something about when things go wrong, when things don't go as expected, failure, that is inherently more interesting than success. If the Titanic had just sailed until 2013 and then been scrapped in India, we wouldn't be talking about it. Nobody
And
would
it
have
made
cared.
everyday mortals, in some cases,
Yeah.
heroes.
Yeah.
You know, whether it
Yeah.
was, you know, the baker on the back of
Yeah.
the ship, or, you know, I mean, it put every, you know, I guess it's like every disaster film we love. You know, you take a separate cross section of civilization, throw them together, and see who comes out of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And that's exactly
in what
what
shape.
happened on Titanic, because the rich, you know, well-heeled people were first on the boats, and
Yeah.
more first-class women survived than third-class children.
Yeah.
You know, it was another parallel
Hey, that's a
society.
mirror of society. Yeah. Mm.
Yes, yes, and I think that probably plays into what you're talking about too, is that, you know, it absolutely held a mirror up to society then and now.
And I think there's another sort of, I don't know if you call it a metaphor, but parallel would be, you know, the certainty that the shipbuilders and the company felt towards the Titanic, that this was the way forward and they were invincible. And I kind of get that sense. And then you have this looming disaster, and I kind of feel like our you know, climate, global warming, we're headed towards this huge iceberg at full speed, and we think we're going to make it, and we're still drinking champagne.
You made me momentarily speechless, because I'm like, oh shit. Somebody sing the morning after. Oh my goodness. In your different exhibitions, I've got your website up now. You've got one about climate change activism. You've got a museum of activism. You've also got a disgusting food exhibit. Talk to me about all these other exhibitions you have in addition to Failure.
So Museum of Failure was my first. I had no experience with exhibitions, or, you know, nothing even related to that. So that was a really steep learning curve for me. And then I thought it was so much fun to use the exhibition format, which was new and exciting to me, as a way to get people to question their assumptions about life, about things that they just take for granted. So I thought, if there's anything, could I use the exhibition museum format to get people to change their behaviors, for example, towards a more sustainable and you know, when it comes to environmental issues. And I was reading an article in the Guardian about, here I am flying around the world, you know, that's bad for the environment, and you know, I'm one of the bad guys when it comes to destroying our planet. And I read in the Guardian, I read this article saying, like, the single most powerful thing you can do as an individual is to to reduce or just quit eating red meat, or just quit eating so much meat. You can still eat meat, but just don't eat so much meat. And I was like, and I thought that was fascinating how that one sort of change of behavior, which is relatively simple, why we don't do it, and why people are so skeptical to alternative protein sources. And I was just thinking, like, how could an exhibition be used to get people to question what they find delicious versus what they're skeptical to? And that's where disgusting food came from, to get people to understand that your food preferences are not because one food is inherently good or bad. It's because of something you grew up with.
Yes, and the process is trying to tell an American that they can't eat red meat anymore. That's when their staple diet is McDonald's. Yes,
exactly.
It's a very hard sell. It's a very hard sell.
This American hasn't been in a McDonald's in like 45 years, but
me neither. I'm being very general. I'm being very general, and
so Museum of Failure. We're winding down on time here, but I want to find out where can we find, other than the website museumoffailure.com, where around the world besides New York can we check it out?
Right now, you can only check it out in Brooklyn, New York. So that's the only place it's open. It's been to Taiwan and Shanghai and Canada, Los Angeles, and then several places in Europe. But
never
right
Belfast.
Now, I don't want to get lynched.
I'm sure all the venues are completely booked up for the next 20 years. You will not find anywhere to put your nasty little museum.
Well, it's genius, and the website is a great resource, and we're so excited. And I bet you, Dr. West, you're going to be sometime in the next week or so going to be watching Titanic, James Cameron's Titanic. Hopefully, you'll be watching Alexandra's documentary, Ship of Dreams, Titanic Movie Diaries, and having maybe not a new interpretation of how Titanic fits into the world order, but maybe just a nuanced interpretation.
Sounds wonderful.
We're so grateful to you for zooming in from Sweden.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. West.
Thank you, guys. This was a really fun chat.
We loved it. Thank you so much. And
it's so nerdy, only talking about Titanic for an hour.
Not to us. Not to
us. No, sorry. Thank you very much.
I gotta go get a burger. I'll see you later.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review. And if you'd like to hear more podcasts like this, hit the subscribe button. For information on where you can see Ship of Dreams, Titanic Movie Diaries, go to shipofdreamsfilm.com. Titanic Talk is a production of Ship of Dreams Film Limited.